My name is Matt Kim. I'm one of the co-chairs of this committee. I'm assistant professor of psychology at the University of Kentucky. Before I hand things off to Martinique and Ian, who will be shepherding us through this session, I just wanted to say a few brief words. Our committee, our early career committee, represents the interests and needs of early career membership, both within academia and also outside of academia. The committee has been involved over the past several months to put this session together, so I just really want to thank them for their contributions over the year. Special shout out to Jason and Patrick. They are coming to the end of their 3-year term, so I want to say thank you especially to them for their service. If you want to learn more about our committee, about what we're doing, if you want to get involved, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me or Martinique or anyone of us on this committee. All right, finally, in the words of the Seattle philosopher Kurt Cobain, I want to invite you to this room to come as you are, regardless of your career level, your experience, whether you're a first timer to APA or a long timer. I hope that there's something in this session that will help you become a better writer, a better communicator, and a better reviewer. With that being said, I'd like to turn that over to Martin. Thank you.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for sticking around another day with us today. We're so excited to kick off this session. So as Matt says so warmly, I'm Martinique Seeley. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at American University. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about this session, what you can expect to get out of it. So during this session, we're going to learn the nuances of the editorial and publishing process in educational psychology journals, including the perspectives of new and experienced journal editors to help demystify the editorial process, from first submissions to publications. And secondly, as Matt said, feel welcome to participate in this discussion. We're going to let our panelists talk and share and answer a few questions we've prepared, but definitely feel welcome to join in after, share your questions. So we have 3 wonderful panelists with us today. I'm going to introduce each one. First is Dr. Vanessa von Colson. Dr. Vanessa is an assistant professor for the Learning Sciences program in the Department of Educational Psychology and Higher Education. Dr. von Colson's research utilizes a variety of statistical methods and examines factors associated with student learning and motivation in technology-integrated contexts, particularly the influence of digital and information literacy skills. Through her work, she is committed to finding specific, actionable challenges for the design of learning environments that match the needs and affordances of modern classrooms. Next, we have Dr. Steve Graham. Dr. Graham is a regent and the Warner Professor in the Division of Leadership and Innovation in Teachers College. For 42 years, Dr. Graham has studied how writing develops, how to teach it effectively, and how writing can be used to support reading and learning. In recent years, he has been involved in the development and testing of digital tools for supporting writing and reading through a series of grants from the Institution of Educational Sciences and the Office of Special Education Programs in the U.S. Department of Education. His research involves typically developed writers and students with special needs in both elementary and secondary schools, with much occurring in classrooms in urban schools. All right, and last but not least, we have, there he is, Dr. Jason Chow. Dr. Jason Chow is an associate professor in the Department of Special Education at Vanderbilt University and the Department of Hearing and Speech Sciences at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. Dr. Chow's research lies at the intersection of special education and learning sciences, as well as developmental and educational psychology with a focus on language. Dr. Chow's also the school focuses on language, social, and behavioral development, identifying and developing interventions to support children with or at risk for disabilities, and supporting special education teachers to collaborate with other educators to best deliver evidence-based practices. A primary focus of his research lab is to support the uptake and implementation, as well as sustainability of adoptable and effective practices and programs in the community settings. So the first question will allow the panelists to speak more about their journal editorial experience and what their current roles are. So I will pass it on over to Ian now to get us started. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm Ian Thacker, Assistant Professor at the University of Texas San Antonio, and I'm really excited to present, our three panelists today and have them answer questions about their, experiences at different levels of the editorial process. So to start things off, I'd like to hear from all three of you. Can you tell us about what your current editorial role is and how you got to be involved in that role?
Start it. Hi everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I'm Vanessa. I am currently the editorial fellow at the Journal of Educational Psychology under the mentorship of Dr. Matthew Bernanke. So if you haven't heard of that program, the editorial. Sorry for hurting your ears. So that program invites early career scholars to become involved in the editorial process. We are fellows for 1 year, and we get to work with an associate editor on editing a set of manuscripts. So I got involved. I applied for the position, but I also was an editorial board member at JEP before I joined the fellowship program. So.
Hi everyone. I'm Jason. I just rolled off of 2 associate editor positions at Assessment for Effective Intervention and the Elementary School Journal, and I'm currently playing the same role, associate editor at Remedial and Special Education and the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. And so I have a lot of fun playing that sort of intermediary role between editors and reviewers and authors, which has been a privilege and a fun learning experience.
Hi, I'm Steve Graham. I'm going to say a little bit about how I got started. Somebody asked me if I would co-edit a journal with them, Patricia Alexander, at University of Maryland with contemporary educational psychology, and I jumped at the chance. And it was a great experience doing it with somebody else, and especially somebody like Pat, because she's so full of energy. I've been the editor of Exceptional Children, Focus on Exceptional Children, Journal of Writing Research, and last and never again, Journal of Educational Psychology, because it's really a large job. So I was at something recently where an editor said, remember to people to be kind to editors. I think whoever's editing Journal of Educational Psychology, they probably get 900 papers a year. Let's be kind to them.
All right, thank you so much. The next question is, what are the different factors potential authors should weigh when deciding which journal they should submit to?
All right, so the first thing that jumps to mind with this question is who do you want to read your paper? So I think a lot of times, we think about journals as the journals we read, journals that maybe we've heard about, these are like good journals or high impact journals or where my advisor publishes or my peers do, but really to me it sort of starts with who I want this information to go to. Is it for researchers? Is it for practitioners? Is it for policymakers? Is it for some constellation of groups of those folks? And thinking about that as sort of a first line of selection, and then sort of moving down the process for then, is it a research study? How high quality is it? How do I think it's going to fit within the grand scheme of that set of journals, and sort of go from there. So that's one of the first things I think about is who do I want to pick this up and get some out of it?
Sure, I agree with that. I think what I also think about, because I work in interdisciplinary places as well, spaces to work with math educators and science educators. So sometimes that decision comes to, again, like who do you want to read your work? And there's like versions of your work that you want to present to fellow educational psychologists, right? Works that advanced theory or is something that highlights something that we all care about together. But sometimes, some part of my work might be it's harder to do, but might be better presented to math education folks. So I also pick those journals as well as outlets when, there's some aspect of my work that I would like to present to folks outside of educational psychology. So something to keep in mind as well.
So I agree with everything said. How could you not? I'd add one thing. Some of you are more experienced than others. For those of you who are less experienced doing this, you're always excited to be published, right? There's nothing like it. The first time something comes out in print. The issue is, do you stay excited over time? And so my advice would be publish in journals that you'll be excited about when it comes out. Now that includes all the things that you said, because it's the right readership, but it's a place that you like to see yourself represented, and you're actually excited when that comes out, even 10 years from now.
Great advice. Thank you. The next question is, okay, this is a long one, and it's written in first person. So I was invited to submit a revision, but it looks like the reviewers are pretty skeptical about it. I don't want to do the heavy lifting of a revision if I think the reviewers have already made up their minds about it. What advice would you give to the author who receives some, critical reviews?
So as a associate editor and thinking about the job that I do, and also as an author myself, I think what I recommend a lot more, and I sort of invite sometimes a conversation as an associate editor, is to talk about it with the people who have the decision-making power, talk about it with the people who are going to be making those decisions based on your revision, based on the decisions you're making with this sort of slow correspondence with reviewers, right? So I think I don't think it's problematic at all to communicate with the editors, because that's our job, and that's our job is to facilitate that conversation. I've really enjoyed hopping on a Zoom call and just meeting the authors, talking through some stuff, and depending on what how the journal operates in terms of an example is in some journals that I'm an associate editor for, I have the sort of accept, reject, reject the full sort of authority, I guess you could say. But some journals rely still on the editor to make that final decision. So depending on where we fall in that role, I think it's really good to have a conversation, because I can get through a lot of maybe big picture questions that the authors have with them, and then we can sort of make that decision. They ultimately will have to make that decision, and it's up to them, but having a conversation with me in terms of where I'm coming from in terms of the evaluative part has helped a lot, and also it can speed some of the things up and some of the understanding and communication. I don't think everyone loves to do that, but it's a question that you can ask for sure.
This is going to sound a little strange. I'm a writing researcher. I hate revising. I always think I'm done, right? You send it out, you're done. But it's never the case. Somebody always wants revisions. My take is usually it's a better paper, whether you like what they're asking you to do. But it's not always the case that you get a good review. And so I agree exactly with what Jason said. If you have a review that's off base, if you're going to the editor, it's got to be a good reason that you're taking their time to do that. But usually they'll listen. And so I'll give a really simple example. I had a paper that just came back for revise and resubmit, but one of the review was there was an error here, there was an error here, they're grammatical errors. And it basically said the paper needs to be rewritten. What do you do with that? And I said to the editor, there's nothing I can do with that. Do you plan to send it back out? Because what I did was alert the editor, because you're assuming that all the editors read those reviews before they send it back out to you. And a good editor will, but not all editors do. So if there's something really wacky or wrong, talk to the editor about this. But again, you don't want to be going to the editor every time, don't want to go to the well every time. Have a good reason for going to the well.
Yeah, I think I agree with those. And I think as a newer early career person, I think two additional things too. I think I get very emotionally attached to my papers, right? So when I get a negative review back, I often read it and then I put it away. And I'm like, because I think the first read is like always like really critical in my eyes, because like I love my paper, you know. So I put it away, and actually, if you come back to it when you're like less emotionally charged, sometimes those really critical review, you're like, hey, you know, I sort of get where they're going. So that's the first thing I would also add. And another thing, I think I agree with both Jason and Steve at that. I think the editorial process I'm seeing as more of this dialogic process that you're having with the editors and the reviewers. So if you do have these kind of thoughts that you sort of disagree with the reviewers, I would engage in that dialogic process, even if you're not reaching out to the editors directly. You know, through those letters, response letters, I would communicate that in the letters. You know, these are my reasons for not addressing this comment because I'm coming at it from this angle, or like explaining that in the letter. I think would be also another thing to think about as well.
And actually, as a follow-up question, we don't have this on a slide itself. What would you say to someone who just had a paper rejected, and would you have any advice for them in helping their decision-making about what to do with that manuscript next?
So one thing I like to do from an author perspective is, so when I'm going back to the first question about what journal to submit to, and we're thinking about that, is rather than choosing one journal and being like, this is the one that I want, and if it's not, then the paper's failed. Is sort of, you know, over time you read more journals, you publish more. Every time I'm excited, don't worry, every single time. But it's almost thinking about clusters of journals where papers can really fit. You're going to have to make some changes, obviously, for your new submissions, whether it's structurally, maybe there's different manuscript guidelines. You also, because we all sort of review for multiple journals and we hang in the same communities, you might get one of the same reviewers in your next submission. So making sure that you're making those edits, but not making it make or break for one journal, thinking about clusters of journals so that a revision is, you've already thought about a potential revision and where you might send that out, so you're sort of prepared for it.
I'm going to take a slightly different track. When I was an assistant professor, somebody who was in psychology told me that every paper you have should be rejected at least once. Now, take my word for it. I don't like rejection. Nobody likes rejection. I can't even look at something for a week. You know, I'll look and kind of, oh, that's a revise and resubmit. Okay, next week I can deal with that. If it's a reject, it's 3 weeks to 4 weeks later. Now, I'm being a little, over dramatic here, but I would advise or encourage you not to view rejection as something that's a bad thing. You know, we don't like it, but it does cause us to reconsider how we presented it. Now, if there's something that's a complete flaw, then we may have to reconsider it in ways that we didn't plan to. But usually, if we've got a reasonably sound study, we can make it better, and there's another journal out there that this is going to be suitable for. The reason that this person had said you need to be rejected every time was she was saying to me, shoot higher. And sometimes I see people shoot low, and the paper doesn't have the impact that it might have over time.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. I think one of the hardest things is actually when you get rejected, you still read the letter. That's actually harder than the revision letter, but I still think there's value in doing that, although it might take maybe a month later to do so. But I think the way I think about it is people look at your work differently than you do. You know, like it's like when you send your kids off to school. So those really comments sometimes help your paper grow, right? Like you're maybe looking at it from a different perspective. So there are ways that you can present this work so it's within scope of the cluster of journals that you're aiming for.
All right, thank you so much. Next question. How do or how should journals ensure that all scholars, especially early career scholars, get a fair shot at contributing to the editorial process instead of relying on hidden networks that privilege those in the know. So how do you get early career scholars involved in the editorial process?
So I think there's a lot of different things, and I don't want to eat up all the space on this. But one of the things is that you're always looking for reviewers. You think maybe you're early in your career, and when people get asked to review a paper, everybody says yes. But that's not the case. Editors are constantly searching for reviewers. If you send out a request for 4 people, if two of them on the editorial board, hopefully they'll say yes. The other 2 are likely to say no. And so one of the things that editors look for is if you're a beginning scholar and they ask you to do something, or they ask your advisor, you want to talk to your advisor or a former advisor, get people to recommend you to do this and then do a really good job. Because if you do, editors remember that because they're constantly looking for somebody. And it's not inappropriate if you've done, say, like for the Journal of Educational Psychology or Contemporary Educational Psychology, if you're called on 3 or 4 times in a year, send a note to the editor saying that you're interested in being on the board and that you've been reviewing for a while. Don't rely on other people to step up for you. Step up for yourself.
That's a great point, and it makes me think about over the past year or two, I've really been relying really heavily on early career scholars to the point where I'm being protective of them because they're the ones, at least in my experiences as in my editorial role, they're the ones saying yes. It's to the point where because behind the curtain as editors we can see who says yes, how many times, how many days it's been since they've reviewed a paper, and sometimes for certain people on the board, it's been 3,000, 4,000 days since they said yes, and they still get named on the board. So I think I've actually sort of been really protective of the junior faculty who have been saying yes, and if I see in there that there's a junior faculty member who has 3 in their queue because 3 different people asked them, I sort of bring it back to the team and make sure that we're not overburdening the junior faculty. So I think there's a lot of things going on, but I do really feel like, and it's weird not being officially junior anymore because I still feel that every day, but it is really the more contemporary scholars coming out of grad school now who are sharp and really just know their stuff, and because they've been thinking about their method or their dissertation or their content in ways that is very, very thoughtful, methodologically rigorous, and so I think that's something that we can really rely on as a field, is that level of care and precision that people think about it, particularly I find in their early career.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think as an early career person, sometimes it's hard to get started in getting your name out there and your area of expertise, right? So I think you're all at this conference. So I'm hoping that you are taking the opportunities to network and getting your work recognized. I think that's really the first step, is to help people understand where your expertise lies. And the second step is, of course, volunteer your time as reviewers. I think that's really valuable contribution. Again, it's really hard to get reviewers to say yes. And I think editors really appreciate when you help them with the editorial process, and that's and also apply for the JEP Editorial Fellow Program. It's really great. My mentor is Dr. Benarkis, standing right there. It's a very valuable experience. You learn more inside knowledge about the editorial process, but also what goes on behind the scenes in terms of how reviewers get selected and things like that. So keep a lookout for programs like that where they explicitly want early career folks to be involved.
Great, thank you so much. And this is a question that I think is pretty interesting. If you had a magic wand, all right, already interesting, right? Magic. No. What is the one thing you would change about the publishing process, or the journal editorial process? So, what's one thing you would change? Could be more than one thing.
Jason, I think this is you.
Me?
Yeah, jump out there and give it to somebody else.
All right, what is one thing you would change? I think, so sort of pragmatically, I've noticed a couple of things. So I have a good amount of colleagues in economics, and they get paid a pretty nice per article review payment. And I think I haven't done any thinking about this until the second, but I'm sort of thinking about the trickle effect of paid for time, paid for your service, and then that might shorten the lag if you get X amount of dollars to review a paper, and if you submit it by the due date, it's this, but maybe if you don't, maybe your rate goes down, or maybe you get some sort of incentive, some sort of like behavioral economics kind of thing, where it speeds up the process and keeps us going. The reason why I was thinking a little bit is because I was thinking about the larger publishing sort of business system, and several universities I've been a part of recently have moved into this these sort of cooperative agreements with publishers. So, and it'd be interesting for you all to check out how it's working. I think they're called like transformative agreements with wherever university you're part of. So there's a lot of agreements now at my institution where if I'm the corresponding author of an article in a journal, it gets open access for free as long as I'm the corresponding author. And I think there are different, like Wiley, Sage, all these different, Cambridge, have different agreements with different institutions. And so a year ago, this wasn't the case, at least where I was working. So now I've been thinking a lot about how the onus is now sort of on the university and a little bit of their finances to really protect us as authors to not succumb to potential publishers who may be in the range of categories as predatory or just not the same type of peer review process as we're more typically used to. That's just what I'm thinking.
Sure. I think that's great. Thank you. I think one thing that I think I would change is how long, like the mode of communication between reviewers and authors. I think writing letters to each other seems like it could be improved upon to improve the dialogic process, right? Because that's not ever how I receive comments. Like imagine if you go to your advisor and they write a letter about your dissertation. Like this is what you would change. I would change that. It would become more dialogic from the technology platforms that we have now. Maybe there's some ways to have more of this kind of back and forth conversation about sections of your paper that's not writing a letter back and forth. So I don't know how that might happen, but I think that would be a good idea.
If you want to get a feel for that, guest edit something for Frontiers in Psychology. And it can work well and it can work very poorly because a lot of times the people who are guest editing for Frontiers don't realize that there's going to be at the end of this thing, this dialogue back and forth, and the reviewers have to sign off. And so some ways it takes it out of the editor's hands because getting everybody as a reviewer to agree on every single thing,
That's true.
boy, that's really hard. But I think you're right that there does need to be more kind of back and forth, but it needs to have a better kind of, an executive sense over it.
Yep.
I'm going to say something that's maybe is going to sound a little odd, but I think we need less journals.
Yeah.
And we need less. We need less studies. And I say this with some trepidation. I just had a conversation with some folks in Europe about what they call kind of a slow process on publication, and it's basically slowing it down. So you have some scholars who produce, 5, even 10 papers a year, and they're very, very good at it. But there's a real press on you to produce. And I think at the assistant level, because it's tied up with your tenure, then what happens is you may not do your best work because it's so unclear about what the criteria are that we end up sending out things that we could have done a better job of. And believe me, I did the same. I did that exactly that way when I was an assistant professor. And so when I take a look at different stages of my career, my best work wasn't done as an assistant professor because I felt this pressure to get so much out there. And this, explosions of journals right now basically play to that. So I would reduce the number of journals if I had my way. And I'm a little concerned about how many of these journals now are, you're paying for it. If you're not paying for it, you might have an agreement, which is great because it shifts back the responsibility for funding back to the institutions and off of you as an individual. $3,800 to pay for having a paper published seems outrageous.
All right, we're about to turn it over to the audience for Q&A, but beforehand, if anyone has any final words to say about, I don't know, anything that's on your head.
I'm going to say something, and this came up for me recently with a student that I got to know from a California university through another scholar, and it's really a dynamic assistant professor at this point. But he's over the top in terms of his evaluations. And I happen to know this paper that he evaluated, which I thought had great promise, but he listed like 600 things that needed to be changed in a journal that didn't allow you any extra room. And my question to him was, did you want that paper to be published? And I think that may be the first question you should ask yourself when reviewing, is this worthy of publication? Do I want it to be published? And then you craft your letter in a reasonable and responsible way to that. I've never said this before, but it made me think about this because the paper never got resubmitted. I think it was overwhelming for the person that, and it actually, I knew this on the side, and I never said it to him, but it was actually a friend of his, and he didn't realize it was their paper. The paper was well worth doing, it just never saw the light of day. So I'd encourage you to think about what is it you want with this paper before writing, before you write your letter and craft it accordingly.
Anything else? Okay, all right. Q&A, so any questions from the audience? Got one in the back. Let me maybe take this mic.
And I put you there.
Thank you for this. This is very, very helpful. My question is about doing a good review takes a lot of time, and we often aren't rewarded for it. Especially, I'm a nonprofit researcher, so service is not even part of my portfolio. So I'm wondering, how do you balance doing the good work and being involved in the editorial process when the system isn't necessarily giving that credit to you? Is it a time thing? Is it a number of papers you're submitting into the system? How do you make those decisions on how much you're reviewing and giving back to editorial versus focusing on the things that you are rewarded for?
I could take a crack at that. I think it depends on what your definition of reward is. I think if you get a chance to review for pieces that are very relevant to your work, I think the reward is sort of intrinsic. Like I feel that I always learn something when I review, like even though it's like looking at something from a different way than I used to. So that's one thing. So I think if you get invited to review something that's very relevant for your work, I would say yes, because it's like you're contributing, but you're also gaining something for yourself, a different perspective to approach a research question. I know that as early career scholars, you want to be, I want to prioritize things that, I do get recognition for, because, everything that you do gets folded into this evaluation process. So there's always a balance of like, if you're already doing multiple reviews, then I would kind of reevaluate that burden. So consider also if the manuscript you're reviewing is kind of relevant for your work as well.
I think practically something that I like to suggest is and you can probably get a little bit more comfortable with this as you go along and as you review a little bit more. But if there's a paper that either has you're accepted the review because you are an expert in the method or the content, play to those strengths and focus in on those sections. And if you find yourself feeling like you need to go Google Scholar everything to make a comment, like that's maybe not where you should be spending your time. So a lot of times when, because example is I conduct, I use the method of meta-analysis quite a bit. And so if I'll get a lot of requests to review those types of papers, and I'm really honest, it's like, this is a methods review. I'm gonna lean on my expert colleagues for content areas of feedback. So I'm really sort of truncating my time to a section that I still feel like I'm contributing, but I'm not taking the full burden, and I'm also just reading to learn for the intro and some of that discussion.
So this is oriented more down the road a little bit. You don't have to review for a journal. That's not something that you're required to do. It helps as an assistant professor that you're on a few journals. But once you get past that point, only review for the journals that you want to review for. Like I review for a review of educational research. I enjoy reviewing for those. Those are harder reviews in some ways because they're literature reviews. And I don't always get stuff in my area. It's a lot easier when it's in your area. But I enjoy that journal. And it always pushes me a little bit outward. I think the other thing I would say in terms of time is that, once you get to know a journal, usually you can tell how many revisions a paper is going to go through. So I may, with review of educational research, on my first revision, really be dealing with big ticket items. Things that I can't really make a decision about this until these 5 things are done. And that's all I've got to say at that point. Because otherwise, if I start getting down into the weeds, about this sentence, needs this or that, I don't know that this paper is going to make it through the process. Now what I'm saying can sometimes drive an editor to distraction. But on the other hand, it's making better use of my time by saying, I really can't, and I'm very clear about this, I really can't make a decision. I'd like to see this come back until these 3, 4, or 5 things are dealt with. And then if we're still alive, then I get down in the weeds.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Oscar. I'm currently a PhD student studying Sydney, Australia. So I just got a question like, we are really new, right? So I'm so happy to hear your story working in helping in the very prestigious journal. As a PhD student and a really early researcher, sometimes we may not have a chance. We haven't had publication in the top journals. Maybe we're published in some Q2 journals, and sometimes you got invitation to review in the Q2 journals, or they ask you to do something for that journal. Do you think it is worthy to spend the time to work with those journals? Because those are the situations that I possibly will encounter at my career stage, or we should just spend more time working on research, publish to the Q1 journal, and then you start working on those reviewing or editorial surface. Thank you.
So my gut goes to figuring out what is it you want to do, and also as PhD students, I think it almost always should be a conversation with you and your mentor. Is that something that you should and can be spending your time on? Is it something you can sort of co-do together? A lot of us, when we do reviews with our students, there's a little box that we check, did you co-edit or co-review this with somebody? Just to get a sense of someone who knows you really well and where you are academically and where you are in your training, where that fits into the process. And so for some of my students, that's a little bit earlier because they're a little more experienced. For some of them, we're waiting a little while, and we have that open conversation. So I think it's really up to sort of your team and your group to really make that final call. But I think the experience is a good one if it's something that you want to pursue. And also, I don't think there's always something to be learned. I understand this appreciation for and this sort of pedestal we put these top tier journals on, but it's still the same process, particularly if it's one that's important to your field and that you enjoy reading and you want to see your paper in.
Where are you from in Australia?
Sydney.
Where?
Sydney.
Sydney. I worked in Brisbane for about 7 years at Learning Science Center there. I think, from my perspective, I'm a long ways removed from interviewing for jobs anymore. But with students that I've worked with over time, our goal is that you review at least for 3 different journals. Now, and when I say 3 different journals, that means 3 reviews, so that they get some experience. But what I try to do, or my wife, who I work with, tries to do, is that we're also doing a review in conjunction with them, so that, and then we talk about it. So it's not all on your, it doesn't all fall on your head. And we view it as a learning process. There's no magic number here. I don't know why 3 seems to be the number for me, but it does.
And just to tack on one more comment, is one thing that I didn't, that I realized sort of later, which really helpful, is that really helps me understand how my students think, and where we can sort of work together to figure out, well, what are we picking out that are similar and different. And I've been doing this for a little bit longer, so that's also been a really sort of later on really enjoyable thing, is to review papers with students.
I agree with that. I think another perspective as an early career person is actually you learn more than how to review and the review process. You learn more about like how to write your own papers, like what the reviewers are looking for. So I think that always has values. Like sometimes you're writing your paper from a certain lens, but really once you get into reviewing and actually seeing other review comments and how that process works, that actually informs your own writing as well. Like these are the methodological things that this type of journal is looking for. This is how you should set up your own writing. So I think there is value in the review process, even though it does take time. So in addition to all of the things that was said here, so engaging in that process with your advisor, I think would be valuable.
One, I don't need a mic usually. A quick comment to everybody that gave us great advice. There is an advantage, I found, to critical reviews. As painful as they might be, I spent many years as a developer of assessments working for publishers, and everything had to be reviewed by boroughs. And you peek at the corner first when you get it back and see, do I want to deal with it now or later? But it got me to separate what are substantial, factual issues opposed to opinions. And you realize, the factual ones are the ones you can do, and it has usually to do with maybe my writing wasn't as clear as I thought it obviously was to me, but not to the reviewer, and you fill in the blanks, make it clear. But if it's an opinion, learn to sort of set it aside and realize we'll agree to disagree, but address only the factual parts, and then that would go back to the main editor. And it's like I said, as painful as it could be initially, it really was beneficial in the end. So it was adding to what everybody else said. But thank you.
Hi, this is also going to be. Am I audible?
That's okay.
Okay. This is also going to be just a comment, but I think I'm a publisher of 15 journals of child psychology, school psychology, and developmental psychology and Elsevier. So if you would like to hear the publisher review, I also publish contemporary educational psychology as well. So about the reviewers, I think maybe if I give the numbers, it's going to be easier. Since the pandemic, many journals that had 35-40% acceptance rates of reviewer invitations, now only 20 to 25% of reviewers accept, and that this also affects the expertise. So the more people reject, the more editors have to go beyond the experts, and the more the accepting reviewers have to spend time on it. So there is a huge reviewer crisis, and you can always, again, volunteer to review, volunteer to edit as well. So if you want to talk about this a bit more from this perspective, I'll be right here. Thanks.
We'll take Matt in the back, and I think after that we'll call it a day.
While we're in the comments section, like it's sometimes useful to think about the value that we are getting out of the reviewing process. It's also really important to think about the value that we're putting back in as people who are authors and also reviewers. So if you think about the amount of value that you derive from the system by getting feedback from experts, we need to contribute that back as well. And my advisors are really insistent that if you're going to get free reviews out, probably put free reviews in. That's what keeps our industry afloat, for better or worse, you want to call it that. So being able to be a good reviewer and a consistent reviewer, ideally in spaces that benefit you, but being able to put it back in is really important. And you do learn a lot through it, and you learn how to get feedback from that, which is a critical skill.
All right, well, let's give it up for our panelists. You did a great job.